So as part of our ESF workshop on representing future generations, we are very pleased to have with us Bernice Bovenkerk. She's a postdoc at Utrecht University and she has a PhD from the University of Melbourne, for which she won a prize, on deliberation democracy related issues. She's currently working on two quite specific issues. On the one hand, the moral status of fish and the ethics of animal domestication. So what parallels do you see between the debate on the representation of future generations and the debate on whether it's possible, suitable and so on to represent in a democracy the interests of animals?
Okay, so I see some similarities and some differences. I guess similarities would be that neither future generations nor animals and nature have their own voice, so to speak. So they will always have to be represented to be present. A difference would be that a lot of animals and natural entities are living with us now, currently, and future generations aren't. So with animals and nature we can at least try to find out what their preferences are and what their basic interests are. With future generations we will always have to project that onto them. On the other hand, as humans we share certain basic interests, I suppose, basic needs with future generations that we don't share with animals and nature. And you see in a lot of like deliberative democracy literature recently, for example by Dreisek, but also by a colleague of mine, Clemens Driessen, they're talking about how can we actually try to start a dialogue with animals and nature. So my colleague is talking about animal deliberation rather than animal liberation. And they're actually not just trying to do simple preference tests, because those have already been done a lot, but also to actually get a dialogue going with animals is the easiest way, I suppose, to do it, easier than with nature, although Dreisek always also wants to extend it to natural entities. So it means that we'd have to sort of step away from our own point of view, and we'd have to try to really imagine what it's like to be them and what they're trying to say to us. So ways in which that's being done is, for example, by technological interferences. So for example, milking machines with cows, milking robots, and just see how cows respond to it and whether or not they actually want that, and then readjust the milking machines, for example, the location where they're put, out inside or out on the field, or the specific way they're being set up. So they were trying to get feedback of animals and nature. Well, that's of course something we can't do with future generations.
So precisely, what are the promises of deliberation with future generations in that respect?
Well, I think you'd always have to have representatives if you want to deliberate, so you can't deliberate directly with future generations. But I think the whole point of a deliberative democracy, or one of the main points, is that people will be confronted with other people's points of view and their interests. So they are forced to take a perspective for the common good, and they're forced to frame their own question or their own arguments in terms that sort of transcend their own narrow self-interest or their sectional self-interest. So that's much easier done more easily when you're confronted with someone. You have to look them in the eye and explain to them why you think a certain policy should be adopted. And if you know, it's very easy to just discount the interests of those who are not there. It's much harder to do this when there is an actual physical person there, even if it's just in the form of a representative for future generations. Right, so I think that's one of the issues in public deliberation that, you know, that make representation really important.
One of the interesting proposals you discuss in your paper is Dobson's idea of a proxy electorate and proxy representatives. Can you expand a little bit on this?
Yeah, and so I think that's just one idea, one proposal to involve representation of future generations. And I think what's good about this proposal is what he says is we should have something similar to the parliament that we have now. We should have a representative in the parliament, and we should actually have a whole setup where people are, there are proxy candidates, there's sort of a proxy electorate, and people will choose. The electorate will choose specific people from this pool of candidates. So they will be accountable to their own sort of constituency of proxy electorates. And what I think is good about this is firstly that it ensures more diversity, because you will have more than one candidate, and so the electorate can choose between different options, different proposals for how to involve the interests of future generations. And the other thing I think that's important about it is that it really gives the voice of future generations more formal power. So that's one of the problems in a public deliberation, is that there's not so much formal power of lay people. They can just, administrators, politicians can just cherry pick what they think is important and just leave the rest out of it. But if you really use a parliamentary structure, then you sort of ingrain this power. You formalize it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bernice.
You're welcome.